Improving Our Landscape Photography, February 29th, 2024. So I will jump right into this. Again, it sounds like we're going to hold questions and comments to the end, but at the end, we can have sort of a free-form discussion about what people thought about what I showed tonight. And I'm going to get started. So this is what I'm going to cover tonight. Contents. It's not a comprehensive workshop about landscape photography, so I wanted to set expectations about that. We're just gonna, it's sort of a grab bag of comments and tips on things that would improve your photos, but it's not like an A to Z discussion about landscape photographer. It's about ways to improve your images. And as I said, we can discuss some of your images or the program in general at the end of the talk here. So the first thing I'm going to cover is composition. And then I'm going to get into some techniques in the field. If it seems like we're having enough time, I'm going to demo the photographer's ephemeris and maybe something about focus stacking and some other things. So we'll see how I'm doing on timing here. I guess if we're not going to have questions, I should be able to do all that stuff. So composition. What is composition? It's how do we create a visually pleasing image? It is telling our viewers and ourselves what is the image about and what do we want our viewers to see. So in thinking about composition, these are the things that we're trying to accomplish. And what I'm going to do next is talk about tactics to help get us there. And I have a bunch of slides and pictures that again, it's just kind of a random list of things that have helped me present better composed images and help my photography in general. So first tactic is clear subjects. The other day when I was thinking about this, I've been a photo club member for about 15 years, and I watch not all, but most of the image reviews. So I figured I've seen about on average 8 image reviews a year with maybe 40 or more, maybe 50 images in each one. So it worked out that I've probably seen 5,000 to 6,000 images critiqued over the last 15 years. And the images that get poor scores, the most common downfall is that the maker has tried to put too much stuff in the image, not really developed a clear subject to tell the viewer what you want the viewer to see. So very important tactic in getting good compositions is a clear subject. Not have too many things or try to accomplish too much. If you're at a spot with lots of cool things, instead of trying to get it all in one image, take 2 or 3 pictures and have different subjects in each image. So tactic number 1, strive for clear subjects. And hopefully this image of the alien throne in the near the Bisti Wilderness in New Mexico is an example of a clear subject. Very much related. And a lot of these things overlap, I will say in advance, because they're not mutually exclusive and they kind of cover the same things. But simplify your images. And the same sort of logic, have a clear, decisive point of view on what you are expecting your viewers to see and what you're trying to tell them. Note when I say these things, I've omitted the use of the word tell a story. So I hate it when judges say that. And I've just tried to find other words that, because tell a story is kind of a cliche, and I'm never really sure if it's animals interacting with each other. Yes, that can be a story, but this picture of Shiprock Rock, I'm not exactly sure that's a story. So I like to say, what do you want your viewers to see, and what is the image about? So related tactic to clear subjects is simplification. And again, in this image, we really have a nice sky and a little bit of a leading line off to the left and Shiprock Rock itself. The power of lower left to upper right. So go look at a magazine and you will see that in magazines and the way they're laid out by their editors, the key part of say a 2-page spread, and usually this is advertisements, is given to the upper right corner. Because again, in terms of visual perception and how we look at images, we tend to read them from the right to the left and from the top to the bottom. So to the degree you can do that, if it's in a photorealistic image, try and compose it that way. And if it's not, flip your image horizontally to get the key spot of the image in the upper right with some foreground action in the lower left. I will note for the record, this is not flipped. This is photographed this way. This is out near Red Rocks Canyon in Mojave. So lower left to upper right. And this is another example of that where myself and another tourist there spent long minutes trying to get the llama, trying to catch the llama, actually looking at Machu Picchu. So that, she was much bolder than I was, and she was chasing it around, and finally it looked the way we wanted it to. So lower left to upper right. Another tactic is create depth and eye motion. And the way you can do that is, number one, don't put your subject in the center, because then your eye tends to get trapped there and never moves around the image. You want your viewers to kind of be able to explore your images. And an easy way to do that is, diagonals are very helpful, like this one, which again is running a diagonal from the lower right to the lower left to the upper right. And a main subject somewhere and an interesting foreground. So again, you're moving your eyes, and when we talk about depth, a picture is, with a picture, we're using 2 dimensions to capture 3 dimensions. So this is something you really want to keep in mind, and compose your images so it looks like it has depth, adding a 3rd dimension to something that otherwise is just 2 dimensions. So create depth and eye motion. And here again, we're illustrating a couple of these principles. But again, the eye, the main subject is the Milky Way, but the eye can maybe start with the skeleton and move through the image to get out to the back of it where our main subject is. Again, going back to the 5,000 or 6,000 images I've seen critiqued, we talk about leading lines in our pictures, and another common mistake is to put a leading line in a picture that doesn't lead anywhere. And then the leading line itself becomes kind of the subject of the image, and that's most of the time not going to make for a very strong image. So we absolutely want leading lines. They're a way to sort of invite our viewers into the image, and again, create a 3-dimensional image on something that's only 2 dimensions. You can see in this one, hopefully you can see that you're just pulled right into this because of the crack in the ice. So leading lines are a key compositional element, but they need to lead somewhere. If I just limited this to the crack in the ice, yes, it would have been a great leading line, but here I've got it going somewhere and leading to the main subject of the image. And then there's a couple more of these things. I use these, I'm not sure if they were footprints or just melted snow, but again, a leading line to this geyser in Yellowstone. And this is in Valley of the Gods National Monument, and the road, of course, acts as a leading line in this case. And by a funny coincidence, 3 or 4 days ago, I saw somebody who took this exact shot from almost the same spot, except I was in the late afternoon, but nothing had begun to color up yet. And he had a nice, colorful sky over this formation in Valley of the Gods. So again, use leading lines, but make sure they're taking you somewhere. So note that I've shown you lots of vertical images, and I shoot lots of vertical images to the point where I've been sometimes mocked by my fellow photo clubbers about this. But I wanted to point out that why would you do that, or why would I do that? And I think that the vertical images can make it easier to get to some of the points that I've discussed already, like simplification. once you turn that camera on its side, there's automatically just going to be less stuff in it. And I find that at least testing a vertical shot in a scene is something important to do, and it can really help you really get down to the main point of your image, because you are by intent leaving lots of stuff behind. I would caution that for those of you who compete with your images, vertical images can be sometimes a disadvantage because you are giving up a lot of real estate on the screen that isn't really used versus because the screen is obviously rectangular left and right, and the vertical image is going to leave lots of space on the side. So I have heard people or judges comment that vertical images might get scored a little bit lower because of all the dead space on the screen. But if it's just for fun or you're making prints, I would encourage you to think about exploring vertical images. So the decisive moment, was of course a street photography thing from, I'll never pronounce his name right, but the French person. And it very much has a place in landscape photography. The quote on the left side, compose and wait, I think it was Sam Abel. I think Nancy Lear somehow arranged with Canon. He's a Canon explorer of light, and he actually did a program in person for the club about 10 years ago. And he's mostly a street photographer, and he talked a lot about compose and wait. So in the landscape world, this is important also. So this cloud, this is the Eureka Sand Dunes in the west part of Death Valley National Park. Those clouds were drifting from left to right across the image. And I thought this was a great composition on the ground, but this would have been a much weaker image if the cloud were not centered right in the middle of the vertical image. And I just, I composed the image and just, I probably was on tripod on this and just stood there and waited for the cloud to drift exactly into what I thought was the appropriate spot for it. So there is a decisive moment in landscape photography, just like there is in street photography. And it's useful to look for these things and compose and wait, as Sam Abel said in that talk years ago. And this also comes a lot in night sky photography. So this one I struggle a bit, like what is the right position for the moon? But I finally decided this was the best spot. So again, I just was up on tripod and just waited for the moon to get into something that I felt supported the other elements in the picture. And then this is a famous photograph, famous to me and Roy Patience, because we chased all around the Alabama hills in Death Valley this is a setting moon, and it kind of wanted to get positioned so it was going to be behind the two needles. The high peak to the right is Mount Whitney, and these are the Crooks and Keeler Needle. And whether you think that this could have been in a better spot, it's kind of up to you. But the point is that Roy and I were just waiting and decided where we wanted that moon to be and just waited for it. So compose and wait for the decisive moment. And when you have objects moving in your landscape photos. Never forget complementary colors. So to the degree you can control this, and in landscape photography, the blue and the orange comes up the most often. And this is again back to Valley of the Gods. But also, you've got red and I think red and green is one, and then purple and yellow is the other set of three complementary colors. So, for those of you who, if you happen to not be familiar with this, it's useful to kind of have those three combinations in your head and look for them in your photographs. And they do make a difference on the impact of your images. So use your complementary colors where you can do that. Tactics, so I sprung a couple of actually just maybe 3 or 4 years ago for a 1435 wide angle lens. And once you start using that kind of a lens, you never go back. And I do find myself shooting more and more ultra wide. So this is at 14 millimeters, and I am maybe 3 feet from those rocks in the foreground. And so think about wide angle photography, but again, being careful that you don't get too much stuff in the image. So I had to wander around for a while on top of this bluff to get to, where, because the wide angle, like everything is in your picture. So I had to find a spot where there wasn't, it was more simple and not too many elements in the picture. So think seriously about wide angle shots. They can be very effective. It gives your images sort of a different point of view. This is another one from the Bisty Wilderness, and again, I'm within 3 or 4 feet of those mushroom rocks in the foreground. So, and again, I think having a big decisive element like that right in the front of the lens is can be a very helpful way to set up your pictures. So this is another one from the Bisty Wilderness, and one thing that, if you're going to start, this is also at 14 millimeters, and I'm probably 3 feet from, this is the cracked egg site from that cracked egg that's right in the front there. If you want to start doing this, you need to learn how to focus bracket or focus stack. And it's one of these things that it takes some getting used to and some practice, but without doing that, not again, for landscape photos, there might be times where we don't want everything sharp in our images, but most of the time you are going to want them sharp. And when you're 3 feet from the first element of your image, they're not everything is going to be sharp unless you focus stack. So I'm going to talk for a second about focus stacking, and when we go live at the end of this, if folks are interested, I can do a quick demonstration on how that can be done. And it does take some practice to get the software right, but once you get used to it, just write all the steps down, and it's pretty easy to do. So focus stacking itself, if you're going to do this, very, very important, mark the beginning and the end of the sequence with your hand. So on my Canon R6, there's software on it that takes the pictures for you. But if you don't mark the beginning and the end of the sequence, you're not going to have any idea what you did when you get back into Lightroom, back at your house. So what I just used to put my hand in front of the camera and take a picture. Now, just to really be more specific, I'll actually, at the beginning of the sequence, so I'll take a picture. I'm holding up my hand here. I'll take a picture with one finger up at the beginning of the sequence. Then I will press the shutter button. I'll enable the focus stacking, press the button, and the camera will take whatever it takes. Use a lot of times with landscape images, it only needs 3, but sometimes it'll be 5 or 6 or 7. But whenever it stops, then I hold up my hand again and mark it with 2 fingers, knowing that that's the end of the sequence. So it's very important to do this, like I said, otherwise you'll never figure out what you did when you get back home. So get in the habit of that. Use the software on your camera, and again, I'm not real familiar with, I know Sony has this now on their more recent cameras, Canon does, and I'm sure Nikon does too. So the software to do this is on your camera, and what's happening is that the software in the camera, you can program it for how many images you want it to use, the maximum number of images you want it to use, and the camera will and then set your focus on the spot closest to you. And then the camera software will analyze the distance to the other elements in the picture and take as many pictures as it thinks it needs to have at least one sharp image of everything in the picture. And like I say, with landscapes at f11, usually a lot of times it's 3 and sometimes 4 or 5 or 6, but camera does all that stuff. All you got to do is mark it, and It can be done without a tripod. So I've done this a fair number of times. You need to activate all your image stabilization and have good technique so you're not wobbling around, and probably maybe crank up your ISO a little bit to get faster shutter speeds. So I've had pretty good luck with doing images, focus stacks without a tripod, but ideally use a tripod. So that will guarantee you that you won't have misaligned images in your sequence. And then, like I said, learn how to do this, and it's done in a combination of Lightroom and Photoshop. So generally, if I do the demo, I'll show you how all this works. So learn how to focus stack. We're talking about improving your landscape photography. This will absolutely improve your landscape photography. Water and reflections. I think my main input here is just experiment. And some people like the cotton candy look, some people like more definition in the water itself, where you can see like ripples. So kind of floats your, whatever floats your boat, but I would say get set up on tripod to make images like this, and then experiment on what shutter speed seems to look the best. So in this image, I just put a note down there, is again, you can see the lower left to the upper right, getting close to a front element in the image, and focus stacking. All these things occurred in this image. Those ferns in the front are probably 2 feet away from the front element of the camera. And the biggest challenge here was getting, I think this required maybe 4 or 5 images, getting them without the ferns moving, which I was able to do. So that gave me a nice defined foreground object by having those ferns out there. Waterfall, moving vegetation in waterfall shots is a constant problem, because the motion of the water creates wind that can have the leaves move around. But in this case, I managed to avoid that. So water and reflections. So this is really important. I mean, I've had people who are, I believe reasonably competent photographers say things to me like, I never take a polarizer off my camera. And, I'm a polite person, so I didn't say, why would you never take a polarizer off your camera? Polarizers are a key thing, a key accessory for landscape photography, but you use them for specific purposes. You don't just leave them on your lens because I have a polarizer on my lens. Because all you're really doing is putting a piece of glass on your lens that knocks out 1 to 2 stops of shutter speed. So if you need them for specific reasons, then you put polarizers on your camera. And the reasons you would use a polarizer is, number one, to kill reflections, not just in water, but also on leaves. And I'll show you one picture on the next page. I traveled with my wife and another couple to New England back in November, and to look at fall color. And so we shot lots of leaves, and leaves definitely have sort of a waxy buildup on them. And also it rained a lot, so we had lots of wet leaves. And the polarizer was very useful to get rid of all the reflections coming off the leaves. So it kills reflections, not just in water, but on leaves. It will make your colors pop to some degree. There's, I think most people are aware, there's a rule of thumb that don't use them in wide angle shots if you have sky in there. But if you have lots of blue sky, yes, that's a problem. It will unevenly darken your picture if you're at a wide angle, and that issue can be pretty hard to correct in post. So if you have lots of clouds, though, that's not so much of an issue, and you can probably get away with it. So they actually are okay to use in wide angle shots as long as you don't have a bunch of blue sky. And again, I think most people are aware. They will make your sky pop too, and make your clouds have better definition. And on full frame, if you're over 70 millimeters, then you won't have this issue with your sky. So, and what else about polarizers? Generally you get maximum polarization when you are at right angle to the sun, so be aware of that. and you spin the polarizer to see what it's actually doing to your images. So use polarizers correctly. Use them, but use them correctly. So this is a fall color image, and to the naked eye or on the camera without the polarizer on, there were reflections in the water, and the leaves all had this annoying shiny sheen on them, and the polarizer just knocked out all that stuff and I think produced a stronger image. Let's see, tactics, check your perimeter. So I put this in quotes just so everybody would realize I didn't make this up. This also came from the Sam Abel talk a long time ago. And what he said, something that stuck in my head, is that you're responsible for every square millimeter of your image. So I'm going to talk about what you need to inspect, but he makes a pretty good point. And again, in seeing images reviewed many, many times, this does come up pretty common, where people have just, they haven't had the eye, or they just haven't looked at the image carefully enough to go in and either compose so distracting elements aren't in there in the first place, or to in post go in and clean them out. So you want to check your edges around the perimeter. You want to look for bright spots and things that don't fit, like a sign in the nature image or something. So if you can't compose without an annoying sign in the image, then take it out and set up your image in that way. So checking perimeters. Let's see, when we go live again, I'm going to see if people want a demonstration of this. But this is the photographer's ephemeris. When this was first developed about 15 years ago, it absolutely revolutionized landscape photography. And if you're serious about planning your shots and knowing where you want to be and when you want to be there, you have to know how to use this software. And it's really cool and a lot of fun. And if you don't use it or not aware of it, then you should. It comes in two versions. There's a free version, or you can get charged not very much money a year. And this thing has so helped my photography. I'm happy to pay these guys their subscription for their pro version of the photographer's ephemeris. So it's also known as TPE, and a related piece of software is PhotoPills. PhotoPills is really good for night sky shots. I don't think the interface is as clean and straightforward as on TPE, especially since TPE added a Milky Way overlay on it. I find myself using PhotoPills a little bit less. It's like the difference between my Hyundai Tucson and then going and getting a Porsche. You might have more things in the Porsche, but it's much more. PhotoPills is much more complicated to operate and has some annoying interface issues. So this is TPE, and if people are interested, I can do a quick demo, and definitely go get this app and put it on your computer and start using it. So when TPE is about where do I photograph? When you photograph for landscape work is very much dependent on the weather. And it's hard to overstate how important appropriate weather is to get, landscape images that will have impact and, something that you will remember. So weather's critical for landscape images. Have some apps on your phone. There's lots of them. Simple ones like the Weather Underground are great. And Windy is another one that I will admit this in the company of my closest friends that I've never been able to figure out how to really use Windy, so I just kind of given up on it. I think it's another example of a Hyundai Tucson versus a Porsche. But have a weather app on your phone and know how to use it. And when you're thinking about when am I going to go out and shoot, you got to be aware of the weather. Weather.gov, the U.S. government's site, is also very useful. So I would say, driving out to sites, it's money for gas, it takes time, and I personally am 100% prepared to cancel a long planned trip if the weather conditions aren't right. And I would encourage people to adopt that mentality as well. Because if you go out to a cool spot and you've got nothing but a blank blue sky, it may be difficult to get a compelling photo out of that. So be aware of your weather, know how to look it up, and cancel if the conditions aren't right. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple of things on post-production. So this isn't about a detailed discussion about post, and we can look at some things if, to the degree people want to when we go back live. So about a year ago, Adobe began to roll out its own denoise AI. And the huge advantage of this is, first, it does a really good job. So when I was getting ready for this talk, before I got up here and raved about Adobe Lightroom denoise AI, I said, well, maybe Topaz is better, or because they've certainly had an AI version of denoise around for longer, and there's other products that also will denoise your images. So I watched 3 different YouTube videos about, and it was like the playoff between Topaz Denoise AI and Adobe Lightroom Denoise. And so I saw 3 of them. One said Topaz Denoise AI is better. Another said Adobe Lightroom Denoise is better. And the third one says, I can't tell the difference. So I think that these are pretty close to functionally equivalent. And you can go pick your YouTube videos and see what people think. But the key advantage of Lightroom denoise is that it's very easy to put it in your workflow because it's all there on your basic Lightroom screen. So key point is denoise first. So don't go in if an image pops up and you have some dark areas of the image. Don't go into shadows or blacks and start raising them until you have denoise, because what you're doing is those dark areas are likely to have noise. And when you increase the brightness in them, you're just creating more noise. So what you want to do is the very first thing is scroll down and denoise the image. And then once that's done, and it does take a little while. I've got images that have taken 5 or 6 minutes for the software to crank through. But so start the denoising and go to the restroom or get a cup of coffee and wait for it to denoise, and only then do the rest of your post-production. So my workflow is denoise first, then set your levels and then your contrast, and those are kind of just below the beginning of Lightroom. Once that's done, most of the time I use the Adobe Landscape preset. And again, if people want, I can show, if everybody knows where the stuff is, great. And if people would like that, we can do a quick demo of that. But I think their landscape preset really does a nice job, and it's a good starting point for most outdoor images. So and if you don't like it, you can just go back. Try the preset. Then usually what I'm doing at that point, I probably have not done I probably will not do a bunch of editing on the image until I've done all my dodging and burning using the mask tools. And I find that time-wise on an image, the dodging and burning using the mask tools takes by far the most amount of time. I have had images where there'll be 12 masks on them, trying to get the sky straightened out and the corners darkened and the key spots brightened and all that kind of thing. So I do all the dodging and burning, and this frequently takes a long time in image processing. Once that's done, then after that, kind of whatever floats your boat. I do find the HSL panel can be a good tool to use, particularly if you want to manipulate the colors of your sky. So I would, understand the HSL panel is really easy to use, and you can There's a targeted adjustment tool, so you can activate that, and whatever color you want to change, you just put the TAT tool on it, and you can move it up and down, and that'll adjust the different color. It'll adjust different spots in your image depending on the color of that spot. So that's a good tool to use, and there are other ones, but this, again, we're not doing a denoised dive on processing landscape images, but I wanted to leave you with several kind of key points, which again are denoise before you do anything, set levels and contrast, and therefore white balance. Try the Adobe Landscape preset, and then do all your dodging and burning. And after that, you can do whatever feels good. And then at that point, I usually put the image into Photoshop. And my preference is I usually finish editing in Photoshop. And even though Adobe has put their equivalent of content-aware fill tools, like adding and removing things in images, Lightroom has jumped up by leaps and bounds. I prefer to do that on layers in Photoshop. So once I have the these basic edits done, then I move into Photoshop and do any heavy duty edits there. And also, I'm a big fan of some of the Nick plugins, so I'll use those at the same time in Photoshop. So that's my thoughts on post-production.